So a couple of months ago, a friend of mine asked me, he's a colleague of mine, a fellow priest, and he said, Jason, do you want me to throw your name in for this bishop election um, in a diocese somewhere else? And I immediately didn't really even let him finish the sentence. I said, no. And it was such a visceral reaction on my part that he wanted to know more. He said, like, why? Why not? I said, well, first of all, I've only been in my current call about 2 years, and God's got a lot more planned for us here. This is where we're supposed to be right now. Second of all, my kids are in eighth grade. They're about to be in high school, and I would like to, see them while they are in high school. And third, and probably, significantly, most significantly, maybe, is I don't want to do the job because my perception of what bishops do on a day to day basis, what they have to do on a day to day basis, and one thing I respect them for having to do on a day to day basis is have a lot of conversations with people telling them things that they do not want to hear. And um, that's what they mostly do. And I said, I don't want to do that right now. And my friend goes, yeah, you're right. That is mostly what bishops do on a day to day, day in and day out basis. And I get that. He understood that. Um, and it's kind of what Jesus does in chapter 10 of Mark's gospel, a.k.a. Jesus tells us things we don't want to hear. Years ago, my seminary New Testament professor, Dr. Deirdre Good, said that if you wanted to test the mettle of a preacher, then you should go to their church when Mark 10:2 through 12 comes up in the lectionary, which it does. She said that because this story is about a conflict. Remember, Mark is the gospel of conflict. Um, and this story is about a conflict between the Pharisees and Jesus. We've seen this before, and it's happening again, except this time the Pharisees come to Jesus with a question about divorce. At least that's what it seems like on the surface. If you read Mark 10:2 through 12, completely out of context, completely ripped out of the context of the Gospel of Mark, then it seems like our current positions in the Episcopal Church on divorce are in conflict with Jesus. But that's only if you read them out of context. We've been reading Mark up to this point. We've seen many conflicts between Jesus and the Pharisees. And at the heart of them and at the root of them, they're conflicts about power. Jesus is building a community that is marked by diversity, equality, and shared leadership. The Pharisees are not promoting a community based on equality. There's definitely a hierarchy within what they or think society should be. So that's the root of this conflict. It's not about divorce. It's not about the sacrament of marriage. There wasn't a sacrament of marriage. The church didn't exist. The Christian church, Christian sacraments did not exist when in at this point. So it's not about those things. It's about power. The Pharisees ask, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? And Jesus first asked them what Moses said, what's in the law of Moses, what's in the Torah. And they tell him, but Jesus pushes it back pre-Moses to creation and describes what an equal relationship is supposed to be. He's recognizing that we don't live in equal relationships between men and women, between partners of any gender now, because we're post-fall, post the time when power, our desires to have power, specifically the powers of God, have separated us from God. So we don't live in the pre-fall creation that Jesus is talking about. But Jesus gives us an example and an aspiration to that, where autonomous, equal partners are able to enter into a relationship and become one. But then, after the Pharisees, he makes an explanation to the disciples. We've seen this before too, where Jesus will teach something in public and then explain it to his disciples. We're having this happen again. This is Mark's storytelling style. But he says to them, whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery. Okay, again, the Pharisees were only interested in the men's rights, the men's power, the power of men, what power they had, right? Because the Pharisees are presumably all male themselves. Jesus is pushing on that and calling for more equality. So, the Episcopal Church has a teaching that sometimes relationships end. We do think that we should aspire to, when we enter into the sacrament of marriage, that we aspire for that to be a lifelong commitment. But we recognize that sometimes relationships end. Sometimes it is in the best interests for the safety of the parties involved, their spiritual safety, their physical safety, their emotional safety, for their marriage to end. And that does not preclude someone from being married again. That's because we believe that people entering into marriage are autonomous, equal partners in the relationship. And so they both have responsibilities and vows to each other. And it's not one party having power over the other because of a simple thing like gender. So that's why I think the Episcopal teaching on divorce and the Episcopal teachings on marriage in its broadest sense of the term, um, including and marriage inclusive of both same gendered and different gendered couples, is still in line with the spirit of what Jesus is pushing for here. He's pushing for uh, people created in the image of God to enter into commitments to each other as equals and to each bear equal responsibility to the relationship. Nonetheless, this teaching is hard to sit with, as is a lot of the teachings in chapter 10, as I mentioned in the prologue. So I'm curious, what else about chapter 10 do you find to be hard? What else do you find about chapter 10 to be challenging teaching that comes from Jesus? I'm curious what your thoughts are, and I hope you remember that God loves you more than you can possibly imagine.